the average man, even the man who's devoted himself to personal growth and healing his trauma, most men would have a hard time pointing to a king in their life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a species that almost gone extinct.
John Lee, thanks for joining me on the podcast once again.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me and being supportive, and I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to you. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's great to see you too.
yeah,
Well, before we started recording, you asked me, I contacted you and said I wanted to talk about the king archetype and mature masculinity. And of course, like you're one of my go-to guys for that. You've been in the game for so long. And then before we started recording, you asked me, well, what's got you so fired up about this king stuff? And
right.
I told you that, recently we've had this No King Day protest all around the world,
All
actually.
over. Mhm.
Yeah, and it's really it's a reactionary movement to Trump in his second term in office and everything that's been going on there. And whenever I hear that kind of sweeping generalization or condemnation of something, I always want to push for a deeper inquiry and exploration of what we're talking about here, so that we don't throw out the sacred bathwater with the king baby,
Mhm.
right? So you're my go-to guy for all this stuff, and I thought let's get into it and let's bring out some more nuance around the king archetype and what it means for mature masculinity.
Okay. Well, as you know, the king archetype is sort of the central organizing principle for mature male psychology, and yet, the word that I just want to focus on right there in that little statement is the word mature. See, one of the things that we don't have in our country and the West in general, especially in the U.S., there's not a lot of maturity to be spotted anywhere in this country. And King Baby is the quintessential example of immaturity, you know, and yet trying to be king. So the very thing that makes the king archetype, uh, you know, is partially the mature male, and we don't have a lot of mature males, you know.
Yeah. Well, as you might know, I do a 6-week coaching program for men based on Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette's book, King Warrior Magician Lover. And we go
Right.
into a deep exploration of these four central archetypes. And the one that guys have the most trouble getting a feel for is the king
It's
archetype.
king. Right. Right.
And I think that's because we have so few models of what healthy masculinity or kingship really looks like.
Yeah.
So, like in Moore's model, each one of these archetypes, he identifies stages of development or levels of development. And the kind of the base level of the king archetype is mere power. And that's what I see in somebody like Trump. It's like that immaturity, but with power.
Power.
And that's a real
Uh-huh.
dangerous combination.
Yeah, I'll second what you said. When I talk about Robert Moore's material, um, guys can identify the lover, magician, and warrior pretty quickly. And they just have sort of an inherent understanding of those three terms. Maybe not so much the magician; that's a little bit mysterious for a lot of men. But but when it comes to the king, the guy goes, I don't know what that entails. So, um, it was funny. One of the things, having taught with Robert Moore and Robert Bly for years and years, uh, they were living examples of these archetypes. You know, watching Robert Bly go from warrior and magician to king was one of the greatest parts of my life. And watching Robert Moore move from warrior and magician to lover was a big, fascinating thing. So the king, you know, he's not only is he responsible for having the power, he's also supposed to be a moral and spiritual center of the society or the community, um, and that's lacking to a large degree in the immature male. You know, uh, Trump has no moral or spiritual center, and I don't want to stay focused on Trump, but it's just so easy to pull him out and say everything we can say positive about King energy, he has the opposite of. You know, it's really, really strange.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I agree. Like, so the next level of development after mere power in kind of cultivating healthy kingship more identifies as ordering and provision, right? And when I think about Trump, I mean, he is just like an agent of chaos. So he kind of manipulates people through creating chaos,
right,
and
right.
it's not about provision. So again, there's like what I'm trying to do is draw out the qualities of what healthy kingship looks like for people so that they can better identify it and not just have one perception of what kingship looks
Right,
like in this kind
right.
of negative mode.
Well, the king, you know, maybe we stay focused more on the positive.
Yeah.
Uh, the king, his duty is to bring coherence. And I see, I'll go back to Trump. He brings chaos. You know,
Yeah.
it's I mean, it's just chaos. And the healthy, mature king brings coherence to the individual and the community. So that's one of the positive. Another thing is, you know, the king that we want to describe, he's a generous king. He blesses with affirmation and guidance, and he governs with wisdom instead of dominance. Um, you know, he's benevolent in his actions towards others, both the individual and society. You know,
Yeah, there's this aspect of like order, uh, king being an ordering principle, and there's different ways to obtain order, or we could even say peace, right? And kind of what we see happening a lot in America, and with Trump specifically, is order through intimidation and fear,
right?
right? And power over, which is a really kind
Domination,
of,
domination.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like a peace without justice.
Mm-hmm.
The Methodists just celebrated yesterday. They have every June 30 or June, well, the last Sunday of June, I think it's like the Sunday after Pentecost or something. But every year they have the Sunday for peace with justice. And
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about that and I was like, well, yeah, we've got kind of, Trump's trying to establish a peace, but it's through fear and intimidation and
Mm-hmm.
subjugation. So it doesn't have that equality of care and inclusive care that is part of the healthy king. But what I want to talk to you about, like, let's draw out like what order looks like in a man's psychology, because that can be a hard one to grasp. Like, because it's not about being like overly rigid and systematic or anything like that. It's not this kind of like rigid ordering that I see in somebody like Jordan Peterson, where it's like this will over the self creates a kind of order. But in me, like when I see him, even the way he moves and the way he speaks, there's so much kind of tension and holding and gripping. And that to me is not the kind of order that I think we're talking about here.
Well, going back to the archetypes of king, warrior, magician, and lover, and me being a Libra, my thing about order, as you're talking about it, is balance. You know that there's not too much or too little, but also to be able to shift between those archetypes. That there is time for warrior energy, there's time for lover energy, magician energy, and not knowing sort of what is being called for is a problem in an immature man. You know, it's like, do I draw the sword or do I put up a shield? Well, you know, Trump would be no, it's all sword. You know, and so the idea of being balanced in these energies is one way to think about order for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the first step of that, and part of what I try to do with my work, is first of all, awareness of these different potentials within each one of us. That, you know, the awareness of and interest in is what creates the conscious connection to these powers, right? And then from that allows you to draw on them in the appropriate situation. Right? Like what I always tell guys is like, you don't want to bring warrior energy into the bedroom.
Right. That's right. Right. Nor lover into war. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, maybe. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things I see like in that model is that the lover and the warrior really balance each other out.
Mm, mm,
Um, because like the warrior without the love, it's like that Irish proverb that Michael Meade brings out a lot is
mm,
that you got to teach a man to dance before you give him the sword.
mhm,
Right?
mhm,
So you
mhm,
awaken the lover before you give the boy or the man a sword, right? And you send him off to war. He's got to have some sense of care and
mhm,
compassion.
mhm.
Um, and then in the other side too, I think the lover really needs like the boundary setting of the
The
warrior,
warrior. Right.
right?
You
But
know,
like you said, that order through balance and the complementary relationship between the different archetypes is that kind of
well,
order.
and to stay with that language is to have enough self reflection and introspection to know which is your strength and which is your weakness, and what is latent and what is obvious. You know, and again, you know, I love archetypal psychology. I've loved it since I was 23. I started studying it at Jung, especially. But there's got to be some grounding of the language for the common man who's not reading Carl Jung or Robert Bly or Robert Moore. You know, so when we say king, what is the most concrete descriptive word for just a minute, leaving the realm of archetypal psychology? What would you say? What word or words would you say that has some ground to it, some
Yeah.
weight to it? Where would you go with that?
What I always try to do is try to describe it in terms of like what it feels like to be around a man who embodies that king energy, right? And so, it's a sense of stability, of groundedness, of like receptivity, generosity.
Mhm.
Like if you're around a man who's really connected to his to a developed king, you're going to be able to relax around him. Like
Absolutely.
he's gonna help the people around him regulate their nervous systems
Uh
just
huh.
by
Uh huh.
his own quality of presence.
Uh huh. Well said. Well said. Right. Well said. Yeah, one of the words that I was using, that the king has a quiet authority,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and his agency doesn't have to be broadcast through
Yeah.
loudspeakers, you know. Um, and again, I like what you said because it's very true. When you're around a king, there should be calm, and your nervous system gets calm. Um, the problem that I want to talk about for a moment is, where are these kings?
Yeah.
You know, we can talk about it, but I would say the average man, even the man who's devoted himself to personal growth and healing his trauma, most men would have a hard time pointing to a king in their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, he's you know, a species that almost gone extinct, you know. And one reason I want to come back to again and again is this idea that we live in a horizontal society. I've talked about this. A lot of my work that I'm teaching and lecturing, both to the general public and clinicians, is moving from hero to elder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what I've seen and thought about is that we're all doing this, and I always piss people off a little bit when I describe it, but the 16-year-old feels like they have all the rights and privileges of the 60-year-old. You know, and it's this way, and what we used to have was a vertical society, and here's the son, and here's the father, and here's the grandfather, and here's the great grandfather, and so it went this way instead of this way.
Yeah.
And this is what pisses people off, because I have this thing, and I know it's partly from my southern upbringing, but can you imagine seeing Robert Bly or Robert Moore or James Hollis getting on a plane in flip flops, cargo shorts, and a t-shirt?
And a Bart Simpson T-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah, but the 60-year-old and the 6-year-old are essentially dressed the same.
Yeah.
That literally the clothing business has leveled.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I just want to point out that, like, I think it goes both ways too. So not only does often the 16-year-old have the sense
Entitlement
of
and
entitlement and
mm,
privilege and like a premature authority,
mm-hmm.
but often the 60-year-old also, God, this just came up this morning actually on Facebook. So here's a concrete example. Somebody in the Facebook group for our little town here had posted something that said, like, okay, this is for anyone over the age of 60. And it was like this kind of affirmation of what you should be allowed to do in your life. And it was basically, spend all of your inheritance. Don't leave anything for your kids because you've already done enough for them. You fed them and clothed them, and now it's your time, and you should be able to just do whatever you want and just have fun and make the most of your life. Like, there's no sense of responsibility or obligation or limitation. So it's almost like, the 16-year-old might have a premature sense of authority, but the 60 pluser has like an immature sense of authority.
I got you. I agree 100%. But, you know, one way to talk about the king stuff is kind of where you're going right now, is to talk about the shadow king.
Hmm.
you know. And one of the shadow king is usually comes in the form of two different sort of ways, either the tyrant or the weakling. And the tyrant is going to what would I say, controls, hoards, demands loyalty. And the weakling, and this is what made me think about this, the weakling avoids responsibility. This is the person you're talking about. And really the elder or elder king, you know, he's going to leave abundance for the children and the grandchildren to come, you know, not scarcity, you
Yeah,
know, again.
because they're thinking about more than just themselves and their limited time on Earth. They're
Exactly.
thinking, that idea of this, thinking about the seven generations, the
Mm-hmm.
seven
Mm-hmm.
generations previous and the ones to
When
come.
you come, right,
So
right,
there's that sense of the king's provision and
right,
obligation to the kingdom, to the family, to the
exactly.
community, right?
Again, generative generosity to those in the kingdom. Um,
Because
now
he's got
there,
like the bigger vision,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like he understands, like there's something there. There's a term in counseling that comes up around. It was, I think, Virginia Satir who came up with this idea in doing her work with family constellations and family
mm-hmm,
dynamics. But there's something about the term she used was equality of value.
mm-hmm,
So it's not equality of role or position or wisdom or authority, but equality of value,
value.
which allows you to differentiate all that other stuff that comes with age and experience, right? This kind of
Uh,
hierarchy of authority. But everyone has value, and that's that bigger vision of the whole.
One of the, speaking of value, one of the things about the king elder, I'm going to put the two terms together
Yeah.
to some degree. The king elder, um, he he's not any longer pursuing things for profit. That he's profited in his youth, in his middle age, but now as king energy. And and again, I guess the question I'd ask you is, you know, doesn't elderhood and king need to go together, or am I being ageist thinking, you know, can a 35-year-old really step into his king energy? Um, what do you think?
No.
I don't
And
think so either.
most of the guys that work with me, I'm 50 now, and the guys who keep showing up at my door are, let's say, 28 to 40,
Uh-huh.
something like that. They've gone
Uh-huh.
through like their first Saturn return. They started to think about, taking responsibility for their life, and they're looking around. They don't really have any models for what that looks like, for what, adult manhood, mature masculinity actually looks like. And what I always tell them is like, look, the king develops over time. I kind of like in that model, I see the king, over years of working with this model, I see it as maybe even separate from the other three. And I think like if you develop your warrior, your lover, and your magician, which I think you can really do actively, actively and consciously, you can work on these things in your life. Having greater appreciation for things, working on, your relationships with others, being more assertive, being more disciplined and focused, studying, kind of deepening your spiritual life. These are all things that you can actually work on. And I think as those three archetypes develop, then the king starts to develop as a kind of accumulation of those other potentials.
Mm-hmm.
And so the king emerges over time. So what I
Mm-hmm.
tell guys is like focus on these other areas because there's things that you can kind of work on really tangibly and actively, and just trust that over time, this kind of natural eldership, kingship is gonna start to
Evolve. It's going to
manifest.
evolve. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the model king for me, of course, was Robert Bly, but to watch him move from these first three into the king was just fascinating. I'll give you an example of this. So Robert starts the men's stuff in his late 60s and early 70s. And he does so really with Michael Mead and Hillman. They started the mythopoetic men's movement mostly with their warrior energy. They had to because they were fighting against odds, of it even happening. Now there was some lover, and of course there was some magician in all that. But I'll give you an example. So in the 80s, a man might say at one of the gatherings, Robert, if I had my preference, you would be my father, or I'd want a father like you. And James Hillman or Robert might say, throw that guy out the window. I mean, and I've heard stuff like that on tape. And then watching Robert proceed towards king and being king 20 years later, a guy might say, man, can I just say, Robert, at one of the gatherings, I sure wish you were my father. And Robert, and I saw him do this more than once. He said, come up here and sit beside me. And he'd put his arm around. And the lover and the king was the predominant thing. That warrior in his 80s, pretty much gone,
Yeah.
Yeah. Generous. Most generous man I've ever known is Robert
Mhm.
Bly. Yeah.
Yeah, and a different kind of generosity, like a generosity of spirit and
Spirit. Exactly.
right, and like encouragement and
Yeah.
appreciation,
Yeah.
like boundless appreciation, that guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, he didn't seem to be at war with any of his peers in poetry or men's work or anything. Like he just seemed
That's right.
to have that spirit of collaboration and raising other people up,
Yeah.
bringing like someone like Martin Prechtel up onto the scene and really
Mm-hmm.
giving him a platform that gave him his whole life, really,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. If you listen to Robert's earlier tapes in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, he's tearing at all the politicians and the capitalists, and
Yeah.
he was doing such a great job of it. But by the time he's in his late 70s and early 80s, he doesn't do that very
Mhm.
much. If you listen to those tapes.
Yeah. But talking about those earlier experiences where his like, when a guy wanted, said that he would love to have a father like him, and all of a sudden the warrior comes out and says, "Hey, like there's a bit of a protection around that, right? Like a protection against the projection.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not handled so compassionately or skillfully as he learned to do later.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something I did want to talk about. Like in one of Robert Moore's lectures on the King, he warns people, especially, in the time that we're in now of no King's Day, and yeah, I get it, but what you really mean actually is no tyrants.
Right. Right.
Like let's
Right.
differentiate here.
Right.
But one of the problems that Robert Moore points out is that he says, like, mythologically, this is backed up. But if you cut the head off the king, then what you're gonna do is you're gonna cut yourself off from that archetypal energy and potential and all the good that it brings as well. And you're gonna end up, projecting on the bad king onto your father, onto other men, and you're gonna be at war with all men,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or on the flip side, in a kind of more passive mode, you might then just start to idealize men. You're projecting
Mm-hmm.
only the good king on them, and you don't see them as fully human and flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this a lot. Like the king comes up a lot in our relationship with our fathers, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's really like the first person to I don't know, to hold that projection for us. right?
Did your father, was that true for your father? You and your father?
Well, this is one of the things I had to work out for myself in becoming more mature is like withdrawing that projection or that expectation from my
Hmm.
father to be this perfect king figure that is benevolent and inclusively caring and calm and centered and all these things that my merely human father could never live up to.
Right.
And so that's what some of this archetypal psychology helped me with, is understanding that I was projecting this onto my father, and with it comes all the expectations. And then when he doesn't live up to it, there's all the resentment and bitterness that gets between a son and his father. And once I was able to see that and understand how kind of unfair that was to my father, then I could look to have, to be fathered by other men, other men who could relate to me maybe a little better than my father could, because there's common interest and maybe enough distance that we don't have that, that kind of dynamic of, that kind of heated dynamic between a son and a father, which can have a lot of competition and things in it, right? And then I could just accept my father as like a guy
A human guy.
and take him on his own terms and see like, well, actually, you know what? He was a guy that I would love to just hang out with. He's a really sweet guy. He's become more so in his older age,
Mhm.
his warrior quieted down a lot, and that's helped. And he's still not, the ultimate father that there's some little boy inside of me longs for, this artistic, mentoring, spiritual father, But I've been able to find that in other older men. And so that
Right,
satisfied the father hunger in me.
right.
And I can have like a good enough relationship with my dad now.
Uh-huh. Well, that's really wonderful to hear, Bud. My experience is of 180, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, now and yet you did with your father what I've been teaching about, and I had to do with my father, even though my father and yours is very different. The idea you cannot be a king if you're still a son.
Say more.
That as long as you identify as your father's son and you enter, if he's alive, and you interact with him, talk to him like a son and him like a father, then that's very difficult for a man to move into his king. The phrase that I use a lot is most men need to stop sonning their father, their mother, and other men in order to move into this more mature place. In our society, we perpetually keep our sons and daughters in this perpetual adolescent state. We don't let them grow up, and of course our society fosters that even. You need to stay young. We're only interested in youth and young. So killing the father is as old as Oedipus and Sophocles and Shakespeare. The and yet most people don't really know what that means or how to do it in a way that's functional and not toxic and dysfunctional. Um, my book came out around the time Iron John and Sam Keen's book, Fire in the Belly, and it's called At My Father's Wedding. And there's a big chunk about killing the father and what that looks like. Um, and when you get your books translated into other languages, they pick out the title that best suits their language.
Mm.
And in France, they changed the title to "I'd kill my father, but he's not here," talking about the absent father.
Uh-huh.
But that always kind of tickled me because that absent father, you know, as Mitscherlich, Alexander Mitscherlich, the German psychiatrist, said, when the father is absent, a hole develops in the son, and in that hole, demons rush in.
Mm.
Well, you know, if you don't deal with those demons ongoingly, you're never going to make it to king. You're probably going to stay in a shadow warrior place, pissed off, angry, you know, not trusting any man, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what does sunning see? Basically, why I thought of you just described yourself, and you stopped being the son, and you actually become an adult man with your father. Again, adult words like adult and maturity have to precede kingliness, you know. And again, our culture is just, you know, Robert wrote the quintessential book that describes this when he wrote The Sibling Society.
Mm.
See, and where he states, you know, again, this idea of horizontal, everybody is each other's sibling. There are no fathers and elders and no kings. You know, everybody's brothers and sisters in the pejorative way of thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of flattening, undifferentiated equality. And
Mhm.
it's like, no, we want equality, but we want equality of value based on our shared humanity. That's not equality in all matters, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about your dad. I finally got to the place where, you know, I killed my father. I stopped sonning him, and we met adult to adult when we would meet. Um, and I have a little story of Robert. Um, I sent Robert my first 3 or 4 books, asking him to endorse them. And we were having a conversation when I first met him. Uh, he said, "Haven't you sent me several books for me to endorse?" I go, "Oh, yeah, no, I've sent like 4 so far." And he goes, "Did I ever endorse them?" I go, "Not a one, not a one." He said, "Well, so I guess you're pissed off and angry at me, you right?" And I said, "No, wrong." And he kind of studied, said, "Well, I got a lot of people pissed off at me when I won't do something like that." And I said, "Well, it ain't me. And I ain't." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I have killed my father, healed the trauma, reclaimed the projection, and I'm not going to put it on you.
Mm.
You know, you're not my father, nor at this stage in my life do I have enough father hunger to put on you." And that moment, I think, was a watershed moment where I think we became friends. You
Yeah,
know,
because
because I
he knew, yeah, he knew that you didn't need that from him and that he
right,
could trust you.
right,
And that's
and
probably allowed him to then give you the blessing
yeah,
for your work and
exactly,
start to collaborate with you, right?
exactly. Yeah, because you know, at the height of his popularity, people were projecting father stuff on him right and left,
Yeah.
right and left. And when he wouldn't comply with their projections, then they would shoot him with arrows, you know.
Yeah, because then he
Yeah,
becomes the bad father, the
bad
withholding
father.
father.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Still projection,
Yep,
but from
yep.
the idealization to the demonization.
Exactly.
You know, one or
The
the other.
the absence or undeveloped underdevelopment creates psychological and societal problems. Now, Robert Moore, God, I wish he is still alive. I miss him so much. he did a lot of talk about what he called monster boys. Did you ever hear him talk about
Hmm.
that?
Uh, Probably. I've listened to
Yeah,
everything, but it's not ringing a bell. So,
yeah, that was one where again, this undifferentiated masculine energy that refuses to grow up, and again, all these words like domination and power and grandiosity. And he said, the society is just filled with monster boys.
hmm.
And every time I think of Trump, I think of that categorization, that label, monster boy. Baby king, king baby, yes, but also still a boy, still a
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about blessing too, because, Moore thought that that is like the highest, like the more you develop the king, the more you're able to bless and give a blessing that actually means something that carries weight. And of course, I'm thinking about Trump because he's our example out there in the world right now. And I was talking to a guy actually, and he was saying, well, like Trump doesn't give any blessing. I said, he gives the bullshit blessing all of the time. So he's
Uh-huh.
like, he's kind of using his charisma and his position and power to manipulate people through these like false blessings where it's very like non-specific, right? It's just
Mhm.
these big, grandiose expressions of praise, like that guy, he's just wonderful. And it's like the
Mhm.
same language for everyone across the board.
Mhm.
They're just wonderful. They're great. They're amazing. But it doesn't carry the weight of a true blessing because it's not sincere.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to talk about blessing because I think, again, it's one of those things that we have such a scarcity of that we don't even know how to recognize it if it's
Mhm.
offered, you know? And I was thinking about like, Moore talks about even the gaze, the eye of blessing.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to think of like when I received that ever from like my father and my grandfather, like even any kind of like soft, loving, appreciative eye contact and the grief hits.
Yeah, I certainly did not get that. I got a little bit from my grandfather in a very um, Southern Appalachian way, you know. But but again, the average man who grew up in the time that I did, you know, we were all so stunted. My father was stunted. My grandfather was stunted. We had no vocabulary. We had no language. Emotional intelligence wouldn't be spoken by a Southern man for 50 years, Um, so I would watch very carefully because I started teaching with Robert when I was 38, 39. And so he was about 24 years older than me. And I would watch him bless, and I go, oh, so that's what that looks like. And then again, I received blessings from him, and in so doing, not only watching him do others, but then what he gave me, it was like, now I can pass this on, I know how to do this, uh, you know, and most people who haven't seen it or received it, how would they know how? You
Hmm.
know, I mean, uh, the blessings or gifts that I got from my father and men like him always came with strings attached.
Yeah,
You
right.
know,
Like that's like the false blessing. There's strings attached. Yeah.
right, right, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I'm gonna like praise you up so that you give me something in return
right,
because it's
right.
really all about him. Right.
That's right, right, right.
Yeah, the word that comes up to me like when I'm thinking about blessing is appreciation. And I like the word appreciation because we have this connotation with money and investments, right? When
Uh-huh,
things
uh-huh,
appreciate, they
uh-huh,
raise in value.
uh-huh.
And I think when an older man that you respect, whose blessing carries some weight, appreciates you, it
Wow.
raises your value.
Wow, but that's wonderfully said.
Hmm.
That's wonderfully said. I've never thought about it that way. But you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Wow. Wow. And appreciation is in short supply.
Yeah.
If you haven't been appreciated, it's hard to pass it on.
Yeah.
You know.
Mostly like what most of us have experienced in this kind of sibling society, every man out for himself, male competition and all of that is the kind of the eye of depreciation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the look of scorn or disappointment, or contempt. My God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think unless we have that internal sense of value, we're not going to be mature or a king, or an elder. We have to value ourselves, right? Otherwise, we're going to always be looking for the external validation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like something there too. It's like also there's like a line between like accepting your grandness without
Mm-hmm.
becoming grandiose.
Well, Robert Moore, once again, going back to him, he gave a lecture at Mentone, one of the Mentone men's gatherings back then, and he talked about and went into called positive grandiosity. Which everybody is kind of going, isn't that a oxymoron? I mean, in
Grandiosity's bad, right?
yeah, grandiosity, you bet. And he laid out a lecture talking about positive grandiosity, and it blew everybody away, and I've used it ever since. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, uh, when I say I am a very good teacher, that's just positive grandiosity. Negative grandiosity is I'm the best teacher. This is Trump, who everything he's ever said, he's the greatest at, right? I'm the greatest communicator of all presidents.
Yes. I'm the
So
greatest negotiator. I'm the greatest
yeah,
businessman.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly,
God.
exactly.
Tiresome.
Well, but positive grandiosity, I do talk to clients. You need to get in touch with what what you're really really good at, and claim it and hold on.
Yeah.
And using your words a few minutes ago, then your valuation of yourself will go up. See, most men, and I certainly was like this, most men think they're a piece of shit, you know low self-esteem, low self-worth, especially the more traumatic home that you come out of, the
Mhm.
lower your self-esteem, and that's got to be raised. Well, we need others to raise it, help us raise it, but we also got to do it for ourselves too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the dog woke up. She
Yeah.
always knows when it's an hour. And, we said we had about an hour to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she wakes up, because all my sessions with clients are an hour. So she knows
Hour.
when it's time to ask
Uh-huh.
for a walk or something, you
Uh-huh.
know?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
But
my dog has an internal clock that's really right on the money.
yeah.
What were you gonna
Well,
say?
I just think like ending it on this, the subject of the blessing and about, what would we say? Like an authentic confidence, a confidence that's based in reality.
Hmm.
It's not a kind of false sense of inflation that's a
Hmm.
compensation for your insecurity, but there's something about that is like grounded and true and humble. It's just saying, look, I put the time in. Of
Right.
course, if I didn't get good at this thing, whatever it is,
Hmm.
man,
Hmm.
I'd really be an idiot, right? So it's like I just put in the time.
What is that poem? At 50, I was blessed and can be. William Butler Yeats
Mm.
has that line. I don't have it memorized. I can't even think of the title of the poem right now. But you being 50, you got to look at that. There's a wonderful, wonderful a couple of lines where he articulates this: I have been blessed, and now I'm able to bless.
Mm.
Beautiful poem.
I'm sure that's in Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart,
Yes,
right? Yeah,
yes,
I got it
yes, it
behind
is.
me. I'll look
Yes,
it
it
up
is.
and include
Yeah,
it in the notes here.
yeah, yeah. All
Yeah.
right, Brian. Well, good, good. Thank you so much for having me on again and having this conversation and continued support. Um, I'm going to do a little plug. I got a clinical conference coming up on July the 11th. If you got any listeners who need CEUs, those are granted. And the two reason why I'm bringing it up, I wouldn't have thought about it otherwise, is that an hour and a half is on the Odyssey of Aging, moving from hero to elder, and the other one is the mother complex, hour and a
Mm.
half on the mother complex. And one of the things that you know I said earlier is you have to stop sunning. Well, another piece towards elderhood and king is working at the deepest possible level with the mother complex. Um, that alone by itself, unhealed and undealt with, will keep a man from entering his king, because the core of the mother complex is I'm not going to give the blessing. I'm not going to be generative. I want somebody and need somebody to do that for me. And in a nutshell, that's kind of the man saying, I need something external to finally make me okay.
Mm.
Well, searching for that external thing to finally heal all wounds, that is not an elder or a king's mission. So just
Yeah.
people can go to my website and see where
Yeah.
that lecture workshop is.
Yeah, that's a critical one because I get, the women who come to me are usually in their middle age.
Mm.
And when they come into their middle age and their warrior wakes up and they want to reclaim their life after years of motherhood and service and everything
Mm-hmm.
else, and they
Mm-hmm.
want their life and they look around, they got a passive man with them who hasn't claimed his life.
Mm-hmm.
He's the first one to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it would
Yeah.
serve every man and woman to have more understanding of this mother complex and
Yeah.
how it affects us in our adulthood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I started reading about it with Hillman and Marie von Franz and some others, and of course Bly and Robert Johnson in my 30s. And now coming back into my 70s, I go, I thought I had done it. I thought I understood it. I didn't even come close to understanding it. So I've been for the last couple of years just diving deeper and deeper into what that meant, and can mean for a man.
Yeah,
So
and the mother complex is so much more complex than just Oedipal complex,
that's right.
right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
so there's a
That's
lot more to
exactly
it. So I'm glad
exactly.
you're doing that.
Okay, bud. Thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure as always, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
All right, thanks a lot, John. Take
Thank
care,
y'all.
man.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.